Hello fellow aviators, aviation lovers and simulation enthusiasts, and welcome to Pilot Dreams channel. And today we're gonna learn how to perform the pre-flight procedure in a 737. Our teacher for today is going to be a real 737 pilot, that would be me. In previous video we covered how to do the preliminary pre-flight procedure, and you can find a link to that in the description below. So our assumption is we are after the preliminary pre-flight procedure and the aircraft is set to start the pre-flight procedure itself. And for learning this process we're going to use the flight simulator. We don't use the real aircraft because we don't want nobody breathing down our neck and hurry us to make it to the slot time and close doors ahead of times. Here we can do it in a peaceful manner with no one rushing us. So with no further ado, let's start. The first line is the procedure is aircraft certifications check. We covered that in the preliminary pre-flight procedure, same as a flight deck security check. Now we're gonna go to the upper panel. So we start with the overhead panel, and please pay attention to the workflow. We're gonna start from back to forth and from left to right, meaning we're gonna cover this column, that column, take a short breath for APU and fire test checks. That column, that column, that column, then we go and cover this row over here. And we start covering from up to down or from back to forth. Flight control switches both guarded on with the low pressure lights are illuminating because we don't have hydraulic pressure. Both spoilers are guarded on. We're gonna switch the yaw damper to on position and make sure the light is extinguished. And then we're going to check that all the lights for the standby hydraulic pump are extinguished, the low quantity, the low pressure and the standby rudder on. We're going to make sure alternate flights are guarded in the off position, and the spring switch over here is in the off position as well, and all the other lights, field diff, speed trim, Mach trim fail and auto slat fail are turned off. From there we're going to go to the navigation panel. Make sure VHF nav is on normal, same with IRS is on normal, FMC normal, control panel normal, display sources is on auto. Then we go to the fuel panel. We should verify that engine valve close and spar valve close are illuminated dim and that the filter bypass is extinguished, valve open same is extinguished, and the other filter bypass as well. Going to the panel, the crossfield valve should supposed to be at closed position. Regarding the fuel pump switches, all should be off, and we have the low pressure light extinguished for the center pumps because we finished this tank first and then we turn the switches off during flight, so we don't want this to illuminate during flights once we finish the center tanks. Done with the fuel panel. We go back up, and this is the electric panel. We make sure the battery switch is guarded on. We turn on the cabin utility and the IFE passenger seat switch to on position. We proceed, we make sure the standby power off is extinguished and that the standby switch is guarded in the auto position. Both disconnect switch is supposed to be guarded. This is a one-time action. If you disconnect the generator, only maintenance can put the generators back on, and we make sure both drive lights are illuminated because at the moment the generators are not working. Going further down, we have the ground power switch and the ground power light. We already on ground power at the moment. Below that we have the bus transfer that is supposed to be guarded auto, and gen off bus for both generators should be illuminated, and all the rest transfer bus off, source off on both sides should be off, as well as APU gen off bus. Now we take a short pause from the upper panel because according to the procedures we want to start now the APU. Before we start the APU we should do fire test. We'll do the fire test anyway on this stage. In some airports we don't start the APU until just a few minutes before start procedure because we don't want to cause ambient noise. So let's see how the overhead and fire protection panel is checked. Okay, so we're in the fire protection panel. Let's zoom in. First of all, we make sure that the fire switches, all three of them are pushed inside, and then the overheat detectors both are set to the middle position normal, and all lights are off. And then we start the test. First of all, we take the switch to the left to the fault in off position. And we should verify that the fault light and the APU detector in operative both lights are on. From here we move up to the 6-pack on the captain side, and we make sure that the overheat detector in the 6-pack is illuminated. Okay, then we go back down and we test it to the other side, switch to the other side, you hear the fire bell. Okay, let's cut it off. Before we cut it off we should make sure that the fire warning light is on master caution, overheat detector, and on the first officer side again fire and master caution. Okay, let's cut the bell. We cut the bell using the fire warning annunciator. Here we cut the bell. And on the panel itself, we make sure that engine number 1 overheat, engine 1's fire switch, wheel well fire, APU fire switch, and then engine number 2 overheat and engine number 2 fire switch are all illuminated. Done with that, and then we test the squibs for the discharging of the fire extinguishers. So all 3 lights are supposed to be green, again for the second squib. And then we go and test the cargo fire at the same opportunity. This is the cargo fire suppression system. Okay, we press the test button. Again, it's gonna cause a fire bell warning. Okay, this time we cut the bell with this black bell cutout switch over here. Okay, so we cut it out and we make sure both squib lights are showing green, forward and aft red lights, and discharge light. And this is the end of the fire test. Now we can start the APU. Okay, starting the APU, you can see the switch has an on position and a start position. The start position is a spring loaded position. So we turn it to N and then start, and it jumps back to on. And now we follow the EGT, although we are not required to, but just this time for learning how to do it, the EGT is going to go up, some lights are going to turn on, and then the end of the process we're going to have electricity. So we see low oil pressure, that is reasonable and happens always during this process. It will turn off later, and the EGT started to decrease. If a fault light, overspeed light or maintenance light comes on, that means we are not able to proceed with the flight. So in a second the APU will stabilize, and then we're going to see the APU gen off bus. That means the APU is supplying electricity, but it's not connected to the bus. Okay, so the APU is on and it's supplying electricity. At the moment it's not connected, so let's connect the APU. We connected both buses to the APU. At this stage we can ask the ground crew to remove the external power. Let's proceed with this pre-flight procedure. Now in the middle column, these are the light knobs. Here we have the equipment cooling switches. We should verify both at normal with the off light extinguished. Regarding emergency exit lights, well, we close that and verify that it's guarded on with the not armed light extinguished. So fasten belts. If we finish refueling, so we turn the fasten belts on. Going further down, we verify that both of the wipers are in the park position. And then back up to the window heat. We turn all 4 window heats on, and we make sure the on light is illuminated in green and no overheat light is illuminated. The probe switches both should be at off or in auto in planes when you have auto position, and all the 8 lights are illuminated at the moment. Going to the anti-ice panel, so the wing anti-ice should be off, engine anti-ice should be off. Cowl anti-ice, cowl valve open, right and left valve open, all should be extinguished. Proceeding to the hydraulic panel, so we have both engine hydraulic pumps are on, and the reason they are on because they are not supplying any hydraulic pressure because the engines are not working. The electric pump switches both should be off, because if we set them to on, we're gonna have a hydraulic pressure at the moment from electric power, and we don't want that because there are ground personnel below the aircraft. All 4 low pressure lights are supposed to be on, and both overheat lights are supposed to be extinguished. Regarding the door lights, nothing special about here. Nothing to do in this column, so we go to the right column. Starting with the air condition zone, so trim air is supposed to be on, with zone temp lights are off, and put the knobs at auto or set the temperature whatever you want. Both ram doors should be illuminated in blue, and dual bullet should be on. Both recyclers fans should be auto. Regarding the pack, so if you started the APU, you put both pack switches to auto, but if you haven't started the APU yet because you want to keep out of ambient noise, you should leave them at off and only set them to auto once the APU is up and running. Anyway, we started the APU, So we will switch both pack switches to auto and then verify that the isolation valve is in the open position. Why open? Because we're gonna need air from the APU to start both engines, the right engines as well, so we need the cross valve to be open. And then we make sure all 3 bleeds are set to on, and we have the dual bleed light illuminated because the APU bleed is in on position together with either engine 1 or engine number 2 APU bleed. Going further down to the air pressure panel, so we make sure all the lights are extinguished, the manual, alternate, off schedule descent and auto fail. We're setting up the cruise altitude, so let's assume today we're going to cruise at let's say 32,000 feet. It goes by 500 feet jumps. And regarding the landing altitude, let's say we go back to EM, so the landing altitude is 0, but if you go somewhere else, you can pay attention that it moves in jumps of 50 feet at a time. And then we set the pressurization mode selector to auto. By the way, if we put it to alternate, just pay attention, the alternate light is green. It means that the alternate controller is working and is functioning well, but this notifies us that something is not as ordinary. Moving further down, then we have the light row. So we start from left to make sure the retractable and fixed light are off, the runway turn-off lights both left and right are off, and the taxi light is off. APU is working at the moment, so we don't touch it. Regarding the start switches, they're supposed to be at off or in auto in aircrafts where you have auto. And regarding the ignition switch, when on the first flight of the day we put it on the right side, and then on the next leg we put it on the left side. This is to reduce wear and tear. The external lights, so you set the external lights according to the time of the day with the, of course, position strobe steady or steady at the moment to off, even if it was at night. At night you can put on the wheel wells, the wings, the logo anti-collision, we set it to on just before takeoff. Now we're done with the upper panel and we proceed with the first officer's side. Of course, the person who's doing the pre-flight procedure is mostly the first officer, so we'll focus mostly on his side and we'll review the captain's actions at the end. Okay, so we're at the first officer's seat. We're going further down to the FS panel. First officer turns his flight director into on and set the course. The course will help us if we want to intercept the radial during departure. Usually we'll use something from the SID, the standard instrument departure we're using today, or we'll set it up for the ILS course in case of emergency when we want to come back in a rush to an ILS emergency landing. Okay, proceeding to the FS panel, we should decide what to do with the minimas selector. Here you set the minimas, but here you can choose between radio for category 3 and baro for 1. We're going to turn on the FPV, okay, the flight path vector. We're going to see it later on over here. Once we enter the IRS position, decide if we're working with meters. This is almost irrelevant today. And set the baro, whether we walk in inch or in hectopascal. I switch it to hectopascal, and at the moment it's set to 1013, which is the standard pressure. Of course, this will be a good reminder for us at the moment to acquire the ATIS information and set the correct pressure at the moment. Here you can set your VOR or ADF position. If you have a VOR relevant for the airfield, you should set the switches to on. Set the range for the map display. Usually during departures we're going to use something between 5 and 10 miles. So let's set it there, and of course we're gonna choose the map position. Make sure the weather radar is not working because we are not allowed to operate the weather radar inside the hangar and near ground personnel. And we can see here, I will do it because it's similar, but don't do it in real life. So when I press the radar, you see those rings are coming. So I'll shut it down. And you can choose what to see during the flight, stations, waypoints, airports, data, terrain, position, etc. Okay, down with the upper panel, and now we go to the right side where the first officer checks his oxygen mask. Okay, so we press the test button. You hear the sound? Pay attention. You hear some oxygen flow. You see the white mark, the right cross over here showing oxygen is coming. Make sure it's on 100%, and then we're going to test the emergency. Here in the simulator is not working so well. We press the emergency mode. This will be a good time to go to the overhead back panel and test the oxygen pressure to see there isn't a drop of more than 100 psi. So let's go there and we test it over here. See, there isn't a drop of more than 100 psi. Going back to the first officer seat, so we're done testing the oxygen. And now we're going to set the air instruments panel of the first officer. First we set the watch. Here it's on UTC time, then it's okay. We make sure both main panel DUs and lower DUs are set to normal. Look what happens if we change them. Of course we're going to get different displays. And we check the autopilot, auto throttle and FMC annunciators. In position 2, autopilot and auto throttle are supposed to be red and FMC is supposed to be yellow, and in position 1 all three of them yellow. We make sure the below glide slope and the speed brakes extended are extinguished, and we make sure the brake pressure is not below 1000 psi, which is the pre-accumulated pressure in the brakes, and not more than 3200 psi if we already have hydraulic pressure in the system. Now we're supposed to check the flight instruments, but we don't have any displays here. The reason for that is that we haven't entered at the moment the current position of the aircraft. So if you haven't done that yet, now it's the time to go and do it. So we go to the FMC. Here we have the FMC and we see the message enter IRS position. You can see also that the FMC light over here is showing yellow. This means that we have a message. So we choose FMC, press the init ref, and it will take us to the right display. Let's clear this message. So we don't know where we are and we're supposed to set IRS position over here. What we're going to do is press next page. Here we have the GPS data. We're going to take the GPS data, press on this button. Here it's in the scratch pad. Press next and go back and enter what the message in the scratch pad over here to set IRS position. Now IRS position is set, but we want to make sure that we are in the right place. So let's dial in or key in EHAM, Echo Hotel Alpha Mike, which is the shortcut for Schiphol, where we are today, a wonderful city. And we see the coordinates for EHAM. There is a slight difference in the last digit, because here when we dialed EHAM, it took the general or the middle coordinates for the airfield, and when we entered the coordinates, we took an accurate GPS position of our current parking position. So this looks good, and we're done with that. We can go back to the flight instruments and check them. Now we should verify that the flight instruments and the PFD and the map display are showing correctly. So let's start. First of all, let's turn on our FPV. I will press this one and see the little bird turned off. Here you can see it over here, this mark. Okay, this little green thing that show the flight path vector. So up here we should make sure that nothing is showing for auto throttle, roll mode or pitch mode. Okay, on the left side we're supposed to see no V speeds. On the right side we're supposed to see we have the correct altitude of our current position and atmospheric pressure is set. Here we can see our heading and we can compare it to the emergency compass, and here we can see the track. We should verify TCAS is off and ground speed is 0. And the last thing I forgot to mention, of course, make sure flight director is on over here, because as you remember we switched the flight director to on. Let's see what we do what happens if we switch it to off. You can see nothing is chosen. It means that the flight director is not operating. Let's switch it back on. And the flight director is on. After we finished with the instruments, we go further down, make sure the ground proximity warning system in hoplite is extinguished, and that flight inhibit, gear inhibit and terrain inhibit are all guarded in normal. From here we move to the landing gear panel. We make sure that we have 3 green lights for the gears, that the red lights for nose right and left are extinguished, and that the gear handle is in the down position. And from here we move to the center panel. We're going to switch the auto brake system to rejected takeoff position, RTO, and make sure the auto brake disarm is extinguished after a few seconds, and also that the anti-skid in op is extinguished. Verify that the speed ref and N1 setting both are in auto position, and we're going to reset the fuel flow counter. We can see it over here. At the moment it shows no reading. If we switch it to used, we can see how much was used so far, and then a long press and holding it to reset should reset it, because now it's 0, so it doesn't reset. And now we're done here. Not part of the procedure, but will be a good practice to make sure that the flaps are in the up position and that the flap end is also in the up position in this time. And from here we move to the engine indicators to make sure all are within reasonable range and fitting our current position. We should verify all is extinguished except of the low oil pressure, which is reasonable because the engines are not running yet. Again, we can see that we have N2 indications. All the rest should be blank. Oil quantity, as said in the previous video of the preliminary pre-flight procedure, should be 16 or above. and vibration should be at 0 because the engine is not working. Working our way further down, again, this is not the first officer responsibility, but will be a good practice to test it. As I said, we make sure the flaps are at 0, that the speed brake is in the down position, that both throttles are closed and the speed reversers are set to closed as well. Speed trim cutoff switches both at off. We already tested the fire panel, and we used the opportunity to test the cargo fire panel as well. According to the procedure, this is the right time to do the cargo fire, but I like to do both fire checks at the same time. Again, if you haven't done it until now, this is the time to test the cargo fire. Now in the central pedestal, and we should set the communication aid for this flight. Usually what we're going to do is start from right to left. Usually in VHF number 2, we're going to have the emergency frequency, so let's set it, it should be 121.5. This is on standby, 1215. Okay, let's switch them again. You can change the one on the left side, only the one on the right side. And on the other one, we're going to have, at this stage of the flight, usually the ATIS frequency for the current airfield. For EHAM, the ATIS is 1 to 2.205. So let's set it up. 1 to 2. Okay, this is the best we can do in this simulator, and we're going to set it on. We make sure this one is on VHF 2. No HF light is on because we are not allowed to transmit HF in the hangar. Over here, we're going to set our Nav Aids. Usually what we're going to set is if we have a VOR during departure, it's going to be active, and on standby we can have either another VOR for the departure or the ILS frequency of this airfield in case we have some sort of emergency that requires us to go back for immediate landing in this airfield. So I'm planning to take off on 18 center, so let's get the frequency for 18 center. We're going to go to the approach plate in the Jeppesen and go to ILS 18 center. And here we find out that the localizer frequency is 109.5. So we'll set this one up. Sorry, 109.5 set. And we're going to use some sort of VOR. So skip all VOR is 108.4 SPL. So let's prepare 108.4. Okay, so now we have the SPL ready here for the departure, and on standby we have the ILS for 18 center in case of an emergency. Going to the microphone selector, so the first officer should decide whether he wants to transmit on VHF 1 or 2. Usually that will be 1 because we're going to be in communication with the tower. And here for every radio that we want to hear, we should press it and make sure the light is on. And then we set the volumes by turning it. So I want to listen to VHF 1 and VHF 2 today. Flight will give us communication to the ground crew, PA is PA, etc, etc. Okay, going further down, make sure the switch is not in alternate but on normal, that we are on broadcast. Very important to make sure this switch is in boom. If it's on mask, meaning the microphone, the active microphone is the mask microphone, and this is some sort of communication blockage in the cockpit unless we are wearing the mask. VHF number 3. Usually what we do over here is in aircraft, so you have ACARS communication, you set the frequency to the data frequency. Going further down, you have the flight deck door. Make sure it's in the auto position with lock fail and auto unlock are extinguished, and stab trim cutout switch guarded in normal. Going back up, this is the weather radar panel. There are different panels in different aircrafts, but usually what we do, we want to see weather plus turbulence warning, and we want the tilt. There is a different tilt for the first officer and the captain. Usually we want the tilt to be at about 5 degrees during departure. This is the HUD panel, we'll cover it in another video. And going further on to the expander, at this moment it should be on standby. Usually we don't have an IFF code at the moment, should just set it to 0. And the expander and altitude source are supposed to be according to the pilot's flying. So if the captain is the pilot flying, it should be on 1. If the first officer is the pilot flying, it should be on 2. Back up to VHF number 1. This is the captain's side. Again, it's supposed to be on VHF 1. Make sure it's not on HF. And here we have the active frequency and the standby frequency. Regarding EHAM, so what I'll prepare usually in any airfield will be delivery and taxi. So EHAM delivery is 12198. This is the closest we get. And ground is depending upon the runway you're using. So today we're using 18 center. So The ground should be at 121,905. Okay, this is the navigation aid panel, same as with the first officer's side. Okay, just prepare the same frequencies, so let's do it. Okay, 108.4 should be SPL VOR, and prepare the ILS on standby for 18 center in case of emergency. 109.5, it's ready. Again, the microphone selector for the captain, choose VHF1, choose the channels you want to hear, probably want flight. Okay, Eureka, we have the Schiphol information. We're starting to hear the ATIS. With your permission, I will just press the switches because it causes too much noise at the moment. Make sure that you have alternate on normal. Sorry, the switch is not on alternate but on normal, on broadcast. Again, same thing with the boom and the mask. And we proceed further down. This is the ADF panel. Schiphol have some ADFs, but we're not using them today for departure, so no need for that. And here you have the float and the panel light switches. Set them as you want. So last thing the first officer should do is to adjust his seat. So usually we have some handles over here on the side below the sidearm where we can change the seat position. Next thing is we should adjust the rudder paddles behind the yoke somewhere over here. Let's see if we can look at it from the captain's side. You can see this handle over here. We can adjust the paddles using this handle. It's not operating here in the flight simulator. And we should adjust the harness. And we should adjust the shoulder harness and the seat belt. So here are the shoulder harness, and usually the seat belt is from both sides of the chair and one coming from between your legs, and you can adjust the length. So we're done with the first officer part of the pre-flight procedure, and now we will proceed to the captain's part in the pre-flight procedure. So the captain starts his procedures by going over the maintenance documents. After that, he performs a lights check. So over here we have the test for the lights. The upper position is the test position, the lower position is the dim. So we move it to test and we see all the lights are coming on. And we're supposed to go over all the lights and make sure that they're all working properly. In every position you can see there are many lights. But of course the light that is not working is the light that you're gonna miss today, because the 737 has too many lights for too many situations. But you're supposed to go over each and every one of them and make sure that the light itself is working. Okay, let's switch it off. After the lights have been tested, the captain should set his FS control panel again, like the first officer. Set the minimums either to baro or radio, according to whether you're doing Cat 3 or Category 1 in this flight. Make sure your FPV is on. So here it's off, so let's press the FPV and it comes on. We're not going to use meters, we're working in hectopascal, so let's switch this one and see the pressure is set 1013. If we listen to that, we're going to get the real pressure. Turn on VORs if needed. Set the display for map. Just check if we change it. You can see this is the approach, but we want to see map. Usually we're working with map. And set the display for 10 miles. Which will be more appropriate for departure. Again, make sure the weather radar is off. Okay, we're in a simulator, so I'll press it again so you can see what happens. When I press it on, you can see here weather plus turbulence over here. This means that the radar is working. This is not supposed to be done in real life in the hangar. So the radar is off, and set the rest of the switches, terrain data, waypoints, stations as needed. From here we're going further to the mode control panel. Let's change the view a little bit so it will be more convenient to look at this. So going to the mode control panel, we're starting left to right. We're setting the course, as I said. If we have a special vector or a radial to catch during departure, we might set this course. If not, we might set it to the inbound ILS in case of an emergency. Next will be to make sure the flight director is on. And it should be on with the master for the pilots flying. So if the captain is pilots flying in this flight, we're in the correct position. We proceed further right. We're not setting the speed because we don't know again what will be the takeoff speed. And heading, usually what we'll do is we're going to use the runway heading in case we'll get some instructions like keep runway heading after takeoff. So for Amsterdam 18 center it should be 183. So I set to 183 in case we get a keep runway heading after takeoff, and the bank angle should be at 25 like it is here. Altitude, usually we're gonna set this one up only after we get the departure clearance to the first altitude we're cleared to. So in case we do an on-off departure and we know from the flight plan what is our departure, like today we're gonna do a Dupo 2 X-ray, so we know the initial climb clearance is 6000 or flight level 60. We can set it now or after we get the departure clearance later on. Okay, proceeding further right, we make sure the autopilot disengages in the up position. Just take a look what happens if we put it down. It disengages the autopilot, so make sure it's on up position. And the captain is down with the mode control panel. After the mode control panel is set, the captain is supposed to test his oxygen mask. It's the same procedure like the first officer. Just test the mask, make sure it's on 100%, do the emergency check with no pressure drop, and you're done. Going to the panel in front of the captain, set the clock, make sure the nose wheel steering is guarded in normal, and check the flight instruments again. Same as the first officer, make sure nothing is on in the modes for the auto throttle, roll mode and pitch mode. Flight director is on, no V-speed, that the altitude matches the airfield altitude, correct pressure is set, verify the heading in the heading selector, verify the track and verify TCAS on, and ground speed set to 0. Main panel DU should be normal, lower DU should be normal as well. Do the autopilot, auto throttle and FMC annunciator test. Again, checking down, 2 reds and 1 yellow. Checking up to 1 position, all 3 of them yellow. Make sure these lights over here all extinguished. This is the speed brake arm, speed brake do not arm, and stabbed out of trim. There might be in some aircrafts takeoff configuration and cabin altitude warnings here as well. Next phase is testing the standby instruments. Here we have the ISFD. Okay, again we're going to make sure the approach is off. Here it's on, it's off. Set the pressure either to hectopascal or inches. We're going to go to hectopascal and set the pressure. You can do it here. Today we are at 1013. Set the lights over here. Here we got the standby RMI. Just make sure it's in either in VOR or ADF, or turn it off. For both sides. Working our way further to the central pedestals, make sure the speed brake lever is in the down position, that the reverse thrust levers are both stowed, the forward thrust levers are closed, flap lever is in the up position usually, and it's supposed to be the same as with the flap indicator. If we haven't set the parking brake yet, this is the time to set the parking brake. We can see it's already set and the red light is on. Engine start levers both should be at cutoff position, and stabilizer trim cutout switches both should be in normal position. After that, the captain is supposed to take care of his communication panel over here. We covered it a moment ago, so no need to cover it again. After that, the captain should adjust his seat, same as with the first officer. Now, there is one thing we haven't covered, and we will cover it in another video. This is the Cdo Preflight procedure, which is part of the preflight procedures, meaning that the captain at the moment cannot call the preflight checklist because the Cdo Preflight procedure was not completed. So assuming the Cdo Preflight procedure was completed, let's call for a preflight checklist and go over the checklist and see what we are checking during the checklist itself. So, preflight checklist please. So here you can see the checklist, and the way the checklist is performed is that the first officer takes the checklist. Usually it's stored somewhere here in the upper panel. The first officer reads every line. The captain answers with the current situation or things to be checked, and both crew members verifying the switch or the items that need to be checked or covered is in the right positions. So let's start. The first officer calls gear pins, and the captain should say removed. Usually the gear pins are stowed over here in this compartment, and you need to make sure all 3 of them are stowed over there. Next item, oxygen tested 100%. This is the answer. Both crew members should verify that the oxygen was tested, and the switch over here is in the 100% situation. Navigation, transfer and display switches. We find them in the upper panel, navigation, transfer and display switches, and the answer is normal and auto, because this is the positions for all of these switches, either normal or auto. Window heat on, all 4 switches. Pressurization mode selector is found over here, supposed to be an auto. Flight instruments. Each crew member checks his flight instruments and the other crew member flight instruments, and we make sure they agree. So heading is 113, I would say, and altimeter setting in 1013, and we check it also over here in the standby instrument. The first officer checks the captain instruments and the captain checks the first officer instruments. Parking brake set. Engine start levers over here, cut off, and then we announce pre-flight checklist is completed. And this is all for today. Thank you for joining me for this flight. If you like this video, just give it a thumbs up. Next video is going to be about the Cdo Preflight procedure. Hope to see you next time and fly safe. Goodbye.